Roger Béteille died believing he'd failed. Yet tonight, jets he designed still fill the skies, 50 years after Boeing called them obsolete. The A300 was ridiculed as a government-subsidized hobby, stuck with just 38 orders, while industry giants dumped and buried it. So how did this abandoned relic outlive the passenger jets meant to replace it? And why does it now fuel the world's biggest overnight delivery networks? The answer begins with a risk no one else dared to take. In 1967, Roger Béteille faced a choice that would define not just his career, but the fate of Europe's entire aviation industry. While American giants like Boeing and McDonnell Douglas doubled down on 3 and 4 engines for their wide-body jets, Béteille argued for a radical alternative, a jet with only 2 engines and a fuselage wide enough to carry 8 passengers across. To most of the industry, this was heresy. Fewer engines meant lower fuel burn and less maintenance, but it also meant betting everything on new standards for reliability and safety that regulators had never approved for a plane that size. Béteille's vision did not stop at engines. He insisted on a fuselage cross-section that could handle dense passenger loads and a full belly of cargo, a shape that looked awkward to traditionalists. That 8 abreast layout would later become the backbone of Airbus design, but at the time it seemed like a gamble no one else wanted to take. The technical gamble was matched by political risk. European governments were wary of pouring more money into a project that might never compete with American dominance. Henri Ziegler, Airbus president, became Béteille's shield in the boardroom. Ziegler worked the corridors of power in Paris and Bonn, stitching together a funding pact in 1970 that kept the project alive when support threatened to collapse. The A300B was officially launched with a design that broke every convention, a wide-body with just 2 engines, built by a patchwork of European firms and backed by political will as much as by market logic. The blueprint was set, but the world was ready to laugh. Industry reaction was swift and merciless. At Boeing, Tex Bouillon barely disguised his contempt, calling Airbus a state-subsidized project destined to collapse under its own weight. American trade journals echoed the skepticism, painting the A300 as a political experiment with no commercial future. In Seattle, the running joke was that Airbus had built an airplane for a market that didn't exist. The numbers seemed to prove it. After 4 years, the A300 had only a few dozen orders, almost all from European carriers under government pressure. For a jet that had cost billions to develop, this was a disaster. Airlines outside France and Germany steered clear, convinced the A300 was neither big enough for long-haul nor efficient enough for short routes. The US press called it a white elephant and warned that any airline betting on Airbus risked ending up with orphans on their balance sheet. Bouillon and his peers saw the slow sales as proof that the A300 was a solution in search of a problem. Each month, the order book barely moved. Airbus was building more planes than it could sell. In the boardrooms of Paris and Bonn, the pressure mounted. The world's first European wide-body was already being written off as a failed experiment, an expensive lesson in hubris. The A300's future looked bleak, and the industry verdict was clear. Boeing had nothing to fear. Pan Am's Blue Globe once promised to carry the A300 around the world. It never happened. The airline circled the Airbus family, signed letters of intent, but collapsed in 1991 before a single A300 entered its fleet. The flagship of American aviation, undone by debt and overreach, left only rumors of what might have been. For American Airlines, the story unfolded in daylight. They brought an A300 into service on high-density routes to the Caribbean and Latin America, betting that a wide body with twin engines could deliver profit where the 747 was too much airplane. But the optimism faded. By the late 1990s, the A300 was already seen as an anachronism, with analog cockpits, limited range, and maintenance costs that grew with every cycle. American's last A300 left the fleet in 2009, quietly retired as the airline shifted to newer 737s and 757s. These exits were not just business decisions. Each one hammered the A300's reputation in the passenger market. The jet became shorthand for obsolescence, old tech, old thinking, a relic of failed bets. By the time Eastern Airlines folded in 1991, its A300 aircraft scattered to secondary carriers and leasing firms, feeding a surplus that no major airline wanted. In the United States, the A300 was no longer a challenger. It was an orphan, too modern for nostalgia, too old for renewal. The tarmac filled with parked airframes, waiting for a second act that seemed impossible. The industry verdict was final, or so it seemed. Jim Parker sat behind a stack of spreadsheets in Memphis, staring at a proposal that most airline executives would not touch. The year was 1994. The A300, once dismissed as obsolete and unwanted, was suddenly available for a fraction of its original price. Passenger airlines were dumping them, desperate to clear out hangars and balance sheets. On the open market, Parker could pick up an A300 for about 10 to 20% of what it cost new, sometimes less than $15 million per aircraft. By comparison, a brand new Boeing 767 freighter carried a sticker price in the tens of millions, easily 5 or 6 times higher. Parker, a former military cargo pilot turned FedEx executive, saw what others overlooked. He did not care about the A300's analog cockpit or its faded reputation. He saw a widebody with a massive belly, ready to haul more packages per flight than any narrowbody at a price that made accountants blink. The numbers were blunt. Pay almost nothing up front, then run the aircraft hard every night, letting the low capital cost erase any edge the newer jets had in fuel burn or technology. While the rest of the industry chased the latest models, Parker quietly negotiated for a fleet that could transform FedEx's overnight network. The A300's supposed flaws, medium range, high cycle design, surplus supply, matched perfectly with the demands of the express cargo world. For Parker, the A300 was not a relic. It was a bargain hiding in plain sight. The decision did not just fill FedEx's ramps, it flipped the script on what counted as smart fleet strategy. The A300's second life had begun, not in the passenger terminals, but in the cargo bays that never slept. 44,000 kilograms, nearly 50 tons, ride in the belly of the A300 on a typical FedEx run. That figure is the heart of the math Jim Parker trusted. When most airlines were obsessed with range and cockpit upgrades, Parker's spreadsheets focused on payload and variable cost. The A300 could carry 40% more freight than a 757 freighter, yet burned only about 20% more fuel. With most overnight cargo missions clocking in under 3,000 nautical miles, the A300's supposed range limitation became irrelevant. The real trick was depreciation. By the mid-90s, FedEx could buy these jets for a fraction of their original price. The capital cost was almost erased. That left only fuel, crew, and maintenance on the balance sheet. For a hub-and-spoke network like Memphis, the A300 became a pure variable cost machine. Fly it full, night after night, and let someone else's sunk costs do the heavy lifting. FedEx dispatches 68 A300 aircraft every night from Memphis, each one loaded to the floor with express freight. UPS operates 52 A300 aircraft out of Louisville. Together, these two carriers operate more than 120 A300 aircraft worldwide, nearly half a century after the jet was written off as obsolete. No other widebody from the 1970s even comes close. Boeing 757, once the darling of U.S. airlines, ended production in 2004. Most of those jets now sit in desert storage, their passenger days long over. Meanwhile, the A300 fleet remains active, with new cargo startups like Chex Air bringing more into service in 2026. In 2019, Boeing executives publicly admitted their biggest strategic regret, failing to build a true middle-market jet. The scoreboard is not subtle. The aircraft that was supposed to be a punchline is now the backbone of global overnight delivery. The verdict is written in flight logs, not opinion columns. Every night, over 100 A300s still lift off, outlasting rivals once declared inevitable. In a world obsessed with the new, the A300 proves that overlooked value can reshape entire industries. Sometimes, the future belongs to those willing to see what others dismiss. Thanks for watching.